Let's dive into the question, should an overweight or obese person consider a reverse diet? What's going on, everybody? My name is William Grazione. I am the owner of The Educated Dieter, your health and fat loss strategist. And in today's video, we're walking through a couple questions that I got direct from the Instagram DM. Actually came in this morning, and a coach that's local to the area says, "Hey Will, do you think someone would really need to reverse diet when they weigh 300 plus pounds and they're claiming they only eat 1,300 calories per day?" So I think this is a really good question, and I also think there's a lot of prerequisite information that we would need to be able to attain to dictate whether or not this person was actually doing what they say that they need to do. Now, if you have that much adipose tissue on your body, we have to think adipose tissue as being stored energy. We should be able to eat in a calorie restrictive state, move your body, and potentially monitor how many carbohydrates you take in, and your physical body weight should begin to decrease, or the amount of stored adipose tissue on your body should be able to begin to go down. So the first thing you have to ask yourself is this individual actually eating the amount of macronutrients or calories that you're prescribing as the coach? The second thing we have to consider is this individual actually in a calorie restriction? If they are, then we would theorize that the numbers on the scale should be going down and they should be getting leaner. However, something that I am seeing a lot of is a lot of coaches are assuming that these individuals, should just be losing body weight, but nobody knows what's going on internally. So there's a couple things that I would highly suggest you take a look at, and this is where the idea of evidence-based macronutrient and evidence-based macro coaching blends really well with the world of functional medicine and functional nutrition. So for those of you who aren't aware, I come from an overweight or obese family with a family history of type 2 diabetes. When I'm working with an overweight or obese client, a few things that I want to know are, where's your A1C at? Where's your insulin at? Where's your fasted blood glucose? And then also, where are your inflammatory numbers related to that specific person? Because I believe that insulin resistance is related to inflammation, and inflammation can also cause insulin resistance. So for what it's worth, I like to unpack that, because not knowing, I don't feel like it does the client a really good quality of service. I would rather highlight these numbers to start with so that we can not only create a weight loss transformation, but we can also create an environment where we know for sure that we are lowering inflammation, we're lowering A1C, we're lowering fasted blood glucose, and we're lowering insulin. So with that being said, I sent the coach a couple different voicemails back, and she says, "Thanks so much. That was super helpful. Her blood work seems to be okay." So let's unpack that a little bit, because if you're just getting blood work from your primary care physician, chances are they're not tracking or checking everything that you would need to check to be able to validate whether or not this individual is internally healthy. As an example, they're probably going to check fasted blood glucose. They're probably going to check A1C. They're probably not going to check inflammation. They're probably also not going to check insulin. Now, in order to determine whether or not somebody's insulin resistant, you actually need all three of those. You're going to need a fasted blood glucose, you're going to need an A1C, and you're going to need an insulin. Okay. Now, I went back and forth with this coach, and she said that she has another client that's eating about the same amount of calories, so roughly about 1,500 to 1,600 calories, and she's been doing so for about 3 months, and they're not really seeing a lot of progress. So what you would want to do is kind of reverse engineer this process and say, okay, is this individual healthy on the inside? And also, is this individual capable of oxidizing body fat via how much is she moving? So something that I really like to do with clients that have a lot of body fat to lose is I will go aggressive in the beginning with an extreme calorie restriction. Sometimes even go more borderline ketogenic, because if I can eliminate the carbohydrate and get them down to a very low carbohydrate intake, about 50 to 60 grams, chances are that I can cause a dramatic decrease in blood glucose levels, and this is going to demand their body to begin to become more insulin sensitive. So those three mechanisms of insulin resistance that I talked about, the fasted blood sugar, the A1C, and the insulin, those begin to naturally decrease because we're using the stored glycogen and body fat as fuel. So hopefully that helps answer her question on what I would do when I'm working with an overweight or obese individual that seems to be doing all the things right, but she's not really seeing the progress that she should. The next question that came in from the Instagram DM this morning is from a really good friend of mine on Instagram. He says, "Hey Will, have you ever seen somebody with low insulin but normal blood glucose and A1C?" And the answer to this is simple. Yes, I have, but it typically always comes after a fat loss phase. So low insulin is somewhat common for individuals that have lost a considerable amount of body fat. So think about it as maybe a woman that's went from 150 pounds maybe down to like 120 pounds, and she actually got pretty darn lean, like athletically lean, or maybe a little bit leaner than athletically lean. When I look at blood work with most women that are pretty lean, or they've just gotten done with the bodybuilding contest prep, normally their insulin levels are pretty low. Now, something to consider is this individual also using some form of a glucose disposal agent or some form of a GDA that would kind of push insulin down or keep insulin low? That's another thing to consider, because when you're ending a fat loss phase, you want to think about, what do I need to do in order to transition them back to their body operating normally? Now, this coach actually also said that his client, even though she's eating about 1,900 calories per day, like, she's not hungry at all, but she's also lean. And I said, well, she's likely not hungry because her insulin's being forced down by the GDA. So what I'd recommend doing is either removing the very powerful GDA, maybe replacing it with something like 300 to 500 milligrams of berberine, or just removing the GDA to allow her insulin to get back to what it's normally supposed to do, which is rise and fall as the meals come in. Now, a good insulin level, I'd say anywhere between maybe 3.5, 4.5, or 5.5, somewhere around there. I normally don't get overly caught up in insulin unless that number starts to climb over 10, in which then you have a lot of people complaining that they're constantly tired after they eat meals, but they're also hungry. They have a lot of cravings. And obviously you guys know out there that if you have a lot of cravings, it is challenging to adhere to a macronutrient-based diet, or any diet in general, because all you want to do is eat all the things. But when you have restraints because you're tracking your macros and you have a specific physique goal, high insulin is not going to help you. And question number 3 came from one of my Zoom calls that I just wrapped up right before George arrived. Huge shout out to George. He is behind the camera. But the question was, "Hey coach, what are some strategic dieting methods that you can use to avoid the stress and keep fat loss moving in the right direction?" So a couple of the tools that I absolutely love to use, specifically when I'm working with women, is utilizing a diet break paired with a deload. The reason why I like to do that is because you want to think about fat loss as an applied stress. Okay, think about this as a balancing act. So we have an applied stress over here. As you apply more and more stress, the individual will essentially find themselves in a position where stress is high, okay, and calming hormones are low. Every time we implement a deload or a diet break, we want to rebalance that body to get them to be able to continuously lose body fat. So my favorite tools are stacking deloads, diet breaks, and also making sure the individual can get a really good amount of sleep going in and through that entire week where maybe we're implementing this strategy. So how would you implement a deload or a diet break? Very simple. You'd implement a deload essentially by cutting overall training volume in half. I am not a big advocate of dropping training intensity, but I am a big advocate of dropping training volume, because I think that excessive amounts of training volume is essentially what leads to low energy availability and an accumulation of stress that people can't recover from. How would you implement a diet break? You would implement a diet break by raising the individual's calories, likely by about 400, 500, sometimes even 600, or if it's a more muscular guy, you could go up to 700, 800, sometimes even 1,000, and you would keep them there for anything over 5 days of time. Now you're pairing these things together, and most likely they're going to improve their quality of sleep. The overall stress on their body is going to dramatically decrease, and this is likely going to allow them to break their weight loss plateau while also keeping the metabolism higher throughout the fat loss phase as they're getting leaner and leaner and leaner. Question number 4 is, "Hey coach, how do you know when your carbs are too high on your high carb days?" So this question comes from one of my clients right now that's currently carb cycling, and she's using one high carb day and 6 low days per week. And her question was, how do I know the high carb days aren't too high? Here's a couple things that you need to be mindful of when you are implementing a carb cycle. Number one is, are the carbohydrates so much to where it's causing your weight to fluctuate by 2 pounds, 3 pounds, or more than that? Or it's causing you to feel like you're bloated and actually spilled over. If it's not, chances are that it is an appropriate amount of carbohydrates for you and your body and your carb cycle and fat loss strategy right now. The other thing to be mindful of is the simple fact that it may take you a longer period of time to hit a new low weigh-in, okay? So you may see maybe a pound, pound and a half spike after a high carb day, and that's normal, but you should also see after that high carb day that you hit a new low on the scale in some capacity if we're tracking a fat loss trend. Now, if you're having too many carbs on that day, which I have seen before, chances are that you're not going to be consistently hitting a new low, and you may need to lower those high carbohydrate days down a little bit to make sure that that number isn't jumping up to a position that's unrecoverable after the high carb day. And question number 5 is, ending a fat loss phase, what should you do in order to ensure your health is in a good place after you've achieved your health and physique goal? Well, personally, I believe that it's a good idea to check the diagnostics of your body. What I mean by that is, let's get some blood work done and let's actually learn to understand what's going on internally with your metabolism, with your thyroid, with your blood sugar, with all the various health markers that we can take a look at on blood labs to essentially determine, after the fat loss phase is over with, are there any deficiencies that we need to be aware of? And keep in mind that if we find a deficiency, we can support that deficiency with supplementation, with lifestyle intervention, and focusing on the primary things that we as a coach have control over, which is your lifestyle, your nutrition, your sleep quality, your exercise, and then also what supplementation do we need to implement to be able to support anything that may have gone suboptimal during your fat loss phase. The other thing for you to consider is, if you dieted for losing 20 pounds, which that could take 20 weeks, and the way that you decided to diet did not constantly remind your metabolism that it is more than capable of metabolizing a higher amount of calories, I would highly suggest that you slowly increase your calories back up over time. Now, I recommend having at least 1 or even 2 high carb days per week, because every time you do that, you are constantly reminding your body that it needs to be able to metabolize a higher amount of calories. And I also believe that what this does is it keeps the metabolism elevated throughout the fat loss journey, which makes the recovery afterwards so much easier, because you can dramatically increase their calories once they've achieved their health and fitness goal, and then you can teach them how to maintain it while working on their health. All right, and next question on the list, not a question at all, but it is a testimonial that I got just yesterday from a client that I worked with in 2020. So ladies and gentlemen, it's been 4 years, okay, since I've worked with this person, and I can talk to you more about her case, but I wanted to share with you the DM that I got yesterday that really made my day, made my week, made my month. And she says, I hope you and the fam are doing well. It's been a while, but after reading this post, it just reminded me that after our last time working together, 2020, my body has continued to maintain at its best. Most healthy weight aesthetic it's ever been. I haven't dieted in years. I still loosely track during the week. I train hard and don't think twice about wanting to eat anything extra on the weekends. I've gotten to a point where my body is just happy and I'm just living. I am forever grateful for our work together. And that came just there on Instagram from a client yesterday. And I'm actually planning on meeting up with her because she's actually moving to the Tampa Bay area, which is really neat. And what I'd like to do real quick is just tell you a little bit about that specific client. I maybe even be able to put an image of her up here on the screen. But she came to me wanting to lose body fat. She came to me wanting to compete in a bikini competition, and we began that journey. However, over the course of time, I realized that her body was pretty resistant to the efforts that we're trying to put in. We had her on high cardio, we had her on pretty low calories, and she just wasn't responding, even though I was trying to do all the things and carb cycling her properly and all of that. I decided to call it off because I'm like, this is not the best thing for your health right now. So what we essentially did was we decided to focus on her internal health. We decided to focus on something that she was experiencing, which was secondary hypothalamic amenorrhea. And if you guys want, there's another video on the channel that talks all about what we do when we're working with a client case that has secondary hypothalamic amenorrhea, and we worked the same process with her. It took her about 8 or 9 months to get her period back, and then after she got her period back, we were able to focus on some body recomposition. And the interesting thing was once we got her health back to normal and she felt great, her body composition actually began to change kind of all by itself. I really wasn't creating or making a lot of changes, and she started to drop weight. And she says, hey coach, do you think this is a good ideal time for us to begin to focus on dropping some of this weight that I had to gain during the reverse diet? And I said, I think it is. And so we went ahead and we started a journey. Now her journey was long, but her journey ended with her losing 30 pounds of body fat. And just as you read there in that, well, I read there in that message, she's been able to keep that weight off for almost 4 years without having a life of restriction. So for what it's worth, I think there's a lot of benefit that comes from learning how to diet smart, learning how to properly manage your metabolism, and learning how to protect your hormones even when you're trying to improve your body composition.